fast start to the stream. Okay. Let's see if this is behaving. Cool. Right. As a reminder, before we start, the paper is due next Wednesday, so keep that in mind. Again, for y'all, if you can turn it in here in person, that'd be great. If not, email it to me, and for obviously my online folks, email it to me. But as a reminder, again, because I'm still going to get people that aren't going to do this, when you send it to me via email, attach it as a Word document or a PDF document, something that I can access immediately, as opposed to like a link to a Google Drive, because A, Francis Marion's email does not like that, and it may just send it off to the abyss, and I'll never see it. Or when I click on it, it makes me send you a message to send me permission to view the damn thing, and by the time you get to that, I'm like 5-10 papers down, and then I've got to go back up and find your crap, and it messes up my whole flow, which when you've got 5 classes, I need to maintain some level of flow or I'm going to go insane. So make it so that I can get to it immediately, because a lot of professors just won't accept it if it's not given to them in a way that they can access without having to fight the system, because we're here to grade, not do IT. So, any questions from y'all before we start? Okay, so we were here last with the Reign of Terror, Law of Suspects, Strum Maximum, etc., etc. The guillotine was doing what the guillotine is known for, and it was doing that in extremely high numbers. And then I got a couple of goofy pictures here, and right. So, as we mentioned, this revolutionary thought pushed beyond France. Well, we'll get to that in a moment. This is actually the French Republic invading and actually doing pretty well against the rest of France, which, again, real quick, is kind of surprising considering, like, they lost a ton of people within France just from civil wars. But no, they're going out into the rest of Europe and pushing their revolution. 1794, they overran the Austrian Netherlands, while also attacking Prussian and Austrian troops. They then took the Dutch Republic, and by the 1790s, they had even taken parts of Italy. Now, granted, they were left as, quote, sister republics, but they were very much under the control of France. I wouldn't go as far to say that they set up like puppet states, but pretty close. On paper, these were places that had been liberated and shown that they can be a republic too, but in reality it was just part of France. Of course, not everybody appreciated this, as the freedom France brought also included France using the resources and indeed conscripts from these sister republics, which meant that if you were taken over by France, you not only were paying taxes to France, but also you were being forced into the French army to further fight for France's dominion. Also, Republican France had a very strong anti-Christian policy, because the whole, like, they got to get rid of the church, so they just went full anti-religion in general, which pissed off just about everybody. And we'll get to actually how some of that plays out a little bit later as well. Because, later, before it was the Catholics and the Protestants fighting each other. Here it's just, we're not doing any of it at all anymore. Which is pretty impressive for a country that was, like, staunchly Catholic up until this point. This is what I was getting to. So, due to the expansion of France's Republican ideals, there was a lot of other groups that also attempted their own little revolutions. In Poland, which had been partitioned by Russia, Prussia, and Austria for generations at this point, led by Tadeusz Kościuszko, they pushed the Russians out of Warsaw in the spring of 1794, but by October, the Russians were back, and about 10 to 20,000 Poles were killed daily in the fighting. Well, it's hard to even say fighting. That was just a slaughter in Warsaw. There's a number of dark jokes in history. One is, of course, the Italian army, which is to say non-existent. The other is Poland, because Poland is just so often eaten by its neighbors and rises up again decades later, only to be consumed once more. Poland is in a really bad place. Ireland, of course, they had their uprising. As always, Poor Harvest led Wolfe Tone to rise up. Now, there was always kind of this unspoken alliance between the Irish and the French, because they both hate the British. And if you hate the British, you typically kind of get along with other people that hate the British. And there had been rumors of France sending weapons and even troops to Ireland to help them fight the British. However, the support never arrived. In 3 months, in 1798, the Irish were killed in the number of 30,000, including Wolfe Tone, who was not killed in the fighting, but instead was captured and died in prison, because, once again, British prisons, well, I can't say British prisons, prisons in the late 1700s would just kill you. Now, while this rising didn't get much done, and again, there were many risings before and will be many after, the many Irish rebellions that would come post this often look back on the rebellion of 1796. In fact, when I was in Ireland doing my semester abroad, the Dublin, so what is it, University, no. University of Ireland, Dublin? They have a weird naming system. It was the college in Dublin. Has this huge old library, and they have like a rotating exhibit, and the one that was there while I was there was about this rising, and I won't even say war crimes, crimes against humanity that the British enacted upon the Irish, and how many things in Ireland are actually named after a lot of the heroes of this revolution, despite the fact that it wasn't the one that won them their independence. Granted, that was in 19. When was the rising? 12? It was around World War II, World War I. But yeah, this was the whole thing. So anyway, this is Kościuszko. Again, the Poles are just as rowdy as the Irish when it comes to trying to maintain their independence. And unlike the Irish, are surrounded by the Germans and the Russians. So not a great place if you want to have your own country. Which is why I've said since it began, if Russia is allowed to take Ukraine, Poland's next. Just period. They're not stopping with Ukraine. Which, I mean, considering how the war has gone, Ukraine's doing a pretty damn good job. But point being, if they're allowed to take Ukraine, they're going for Poland next. There's not going to be any, okay, well, we're done. This is what we wanted. Here is the 1796 rising in Ireland. As you can see, dudes with pikes against dudes with guns and cannons. That's the typical Irish versus British dynamic. Here's Wolfe Tone. Do I have? No, okay. Some of the stuff that I showed you guys in the 30 Years' War, about like burying people up to their neck and, you know, letting them suffocate in the sun, or hanging pregnant women from trees and cutting their babies out and then throwing the babies to like pigs and dogs. That was the sort of stuff they did in Ireland to the Irish. Yeah, that's why the Irish to this day despise the British, because that was, and not just this one time. That's just kind of been the norm since Britain took over Ireland. Anytime the Irish push for independence, the British come back and are extraordinarily violent. Which we'll get into more later, because of course this war is going to happen later. Meanwhile, Saint-Domingue, this was a French possession in the Caribbean. There was a fair number of free blacks there, and they wanted to be given citizenship, because they weren't slaves. They were just people that had no citizenship, much like we will see here in the U.S. post-Civil War. They were granted citizenship, but the plantation owners who actually ran the island refused to implement the law. So the free blacks in Saint-Domingue decided, hey, you know what? We outnumber you guys, and also there's a ton of slaves, so let's just overthrow this whole thing. And they did. Rose in huge numbers, overran the French landowners. While this was going on, the British and Spanish showed up just to make things worse for the French, because if the French are having a hard time, everybody else wants to get involved. So in 1794, the convention officially freed the slaves, and Toussaint L'Ouverture, who was a former slave and was the guy in charge of the rebellion, steered the rebellion back around to work with the French, and pushed the British and Spanish off the island. However, he was not content with Saint-Domingue being a part of France, and wished for the island to be independent, and for himself to be governor for life, because why not? You're already running things. However, after a few years, Napoleon wanted Saint-Domingue back, so the French once again attacked the island. L'Ouverture was captured and died in prison, but the people of Saint-Domingue would not be beaten so easy, and by 1803, Napoleon threw up his hands and told them they could have the island. So on January 1st, 1804, the independent Republic of Haiti was created. So Saint-Domingue became Haiti. I almost said Haitians a minute ago, so they're not Haitians yet. They're not Haitians until 1804. And their response to their former owners was fair. When I talk about people being hanged from lampposts, I mean, this isn't specifically a lamppost, but this is what I'm talking about. where you put the noose around the person's neck and you lift them up while they're still kicking. Granted, the kicking tends to hasten the suffocation because it's, crushing their throat. But this is not hanging on gallows where it drops you and breaks your neck. This is choke. But you might as well be holding a person with your bare hands and choking them out, is what's happening here. And as you can see, they built a lot of these. There were a lot of French to go around. This is often used as a propaganda about, oh, the Haitians are so violent, and this dude's about to hit this. Where's my mouse? About to hit this child over the 50-yard line with this massive bat or a club with like nails sticking out of it. Meanwhile, the lady over here is getting strangled and the dude's about to get shivved. It's like, okay, but even if this was an accurate representation of what was happening on the island, this was a Caribbean slave colony, which meant that the slaves were being literally worked to death. Not to be, and it's amazing that this is even an argument anymore. Not to say that American slavery was not bad, it wasn't as bad as in the Caribbean because, again, they were literally worked until they died, and then they brought in more slaves to replace them. So they had a bit of a chip on their shoulder after this. I don't have a picture of Salt Lavature? Okay, I've got that in another class then. And I want to take a quick step here. I mentioned this in my American history course, but I want to make sure I bring it up here. The reason that Haiti is in the state that it's in today is because immediately after this, all the countries that were ruled by white people, which is to say most of them, cut off any kind of trade negotiations with the island. They starved the island out on purpose. They economically, because you can't survive, you can't be a self-sustaining government with just an island. Trade is a whole part of why we have islands, because that's great for trading, because it's right in the middle of places. They specifically ran Haiti's economy into the ground because they were afraid of a government that was run by black people. So when you see Haiti today, in a situation that it's in, and people are like fleeing from there to escape poverty, it's not because what you'll hear from racists where it's like, oh, well, they did it to themselves. They did not. It was a concerted effort by France and England and very much America, because we were America by this point, and also we were terrified that this sort of thing was going to happen here because of how we treated our slaves. So, FYI, just to bring this into the modern day, yeah. All right. Culture in Revolutionary France. So this idea of virtue became all-encompassing. Again, if you were here last semester, we talked about virtue in relation to Rome, which is not what you would see today as like someone being virtuous, where they're, good and hardworking and helping people. Virtue, by definition, is literally like being a man, because vir is where we get virility from, and that's specifically like manliness, not like what you think of with, say, maybe Teddy Roosevelt, where you're going out and shooting lions or whatever. But this was specifically equal rights among men. It's about men. It's about men leading the world, etc. Also giving one's all to the revolution, never questioning the means by which the revolution operated. which again is very much going back to Rome, where in the old Rome Republic, a lot of the virtues, again, however you want to see virtue, instilled in people was to give your all to the Republic so that it can be as strong as possible, so that it can make life as good for the people as possible. So everyone is working towards the good of the Republic because supposedly the Republic was working for the good of the people. Planting liberty trees, the tricolor, which is still France's flag. What's the order that it's in? Blue, white, and red, I believe. They also had the Pharyngean cap. This is, again, something that we would see in American iconography as well. The Pharyngean cap was a symbol. It's a little hat that I've got an image of here in just a minute, that would be given to freed slaves in Rome. Because in Rome, slavery was typically not like race-based. When Rome would take over other cities or conquer tribes, they would take the people that they had conquered and make them into slaves. And a lot of times those people would look like a Roman, at least when it came to like the other Latin cities. So when a slave was freed, they'd be given this cap as proof of their freedom so that they wouldn't be mistaken as like a runaway slave. However, a lot of these groups that wore these Pharyngean caps were often the sans-culottes and other more radical members of the revolution, because they saw themselves as being freed from the slavery of the French Empire, I guess. You know, we're going to ignore all that stuff that happened with Saint-Dominique. We're talking about France being freed from enslavement, which, again, we use that a lot here in America during the Revolution with people wearing Pharyngean caps, or at least it being used as symbolism. In fact, in a lot of state seals, for at least the states here on the East Coast that were existent during the Revolution, a lot of state seals have the Pharyngean cap. I think New Jersey might be one. Our state seal is real simple. You know, it's the palmetto tree and the crescent moon. Anywho, Revolution of Reason, change calendars and measuring systems. The calendar system was based on seasons. Months were split into 3 weeks of 10 days, which would be easier to keep up with. But it also meant you worked 7 days and then had 3 off. Or did you work 8 and had 2 off? You didn't have a lot of time off. People were getting worked to death. Well, not quite as literally as what was going on in Haiti, but like people weren't able to adjust to a 10-day-long week. So that didn't really stick around. However, their idea of measurement being split into units of 10, which is the metric system, has very much stuck around in every country that's not America. Because we're still using, we see that as like, oh, we're different because we're America and American exceptionalism. The system that we use is the imperial system, which is to say, the old British system. So it was like it was a holdover from before the Revolution. And you would think that using a system that wasn't the British will be something we'd be on board with. So I don't know why we didn't immediately grab the metric system. Because it's like, oh, it's made by the French, therefore not British, therefore we would prefer it. I don't know. No. They don't, not that. The metric system, as far as like measuring things. Yeah, like meters and centimeters and. There are some I'm pretty sure it's still 7, but there are calendars like the old Russian calendar and the Islamic calendar are different than what we use, but I'm pretty sure the weeks are usually still 7 days. No. I'm sure. I mean, officially, everybody still uses what the world calendar uses because that's necessary for. Yeah, the Gregorian. Yeah, but yeah, like local stuff. Again, the technically year one in the Islamic calendar was when Muhammad fled to Medina, and that was in like the 700s, I think. So they're 700 years behind us, at least in the numbering. Yeah, that makes sense. Makes sense. That's Kim Il Sung. That's not Kim the Second song. That's an I and an L. I know it's awful. Yeah, that's Kim Il Sung, which is the current ruler's father, grandfather. Right? No, because it was Kim Jong Il was Kim Jong Un's father, so this will be his grandfather. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean it's because it's what most countries use. So for like international stuff, we just stick with that. But some places do use. Yeah. I mean, also like the reason why technically, um, airlines all use English. That's the language of airlines. So even like a French airline, when they're coming into land, they have to speak English to the tower, uh, ground control, whatever. No, because China. Yeah, like in number of countries, maybe. Um, but like there's a lot of French and German in Europe, and of course there are various colonies. Like for example, I have a friend who lives in New York, who was originally from I think it's Liberia, so her first language is French because they were a French colony for a long time, or Libya. I get those two mixed up. Libya. Um, anyway, yeah, her first language is French because that's just what the language of that country is because it was controlled by France for so long. So, yeah, but as far as calendars, pretty much there is like the traditional Russian calendar, which is off by like a month and a half or something. It's weird. But as far as weeks, I'm pretty sure is seven, because between Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, 7 day week is like part of the thing. In the Far East, I don't know. Maybe they might have like a traditional something different, but as far as worldwide, but measurements is like again kilograms and meters and that sort of thing. Ah, that makes sense. That's a good standard of measure. The cubit. Well, well, it wouldn't be too bad unless you had like a monster foot guy, which I don't know. Sometimes we'll just stick with the old one, I guess, for that one. Um. Oh, right. Religion. I was getting to this. So they couldn't just get rid of religion entirely. Um, they had a deism inspired version, the cult of the supreme being. Now, again, deism is it's always described to me, or at least it was when I was growing up, was a clockmaker god, where there is some being beyond us that put the universe into motion and set us off like a balloon adrift, and we're on our own from that. There is something out there beyond us that we don't understand. Great. we're on our own past that. The Cult of Supreme Being was slightly different in that, well, I guess I shouldn't say slightly different, because its leaders were extremely powerful, which is to say, Robespierre, I believe is, yeah, I get Robespierre and Jean-Jacques Rousseau mixed up because R's and French words. Yeah, Robespierre was in charge, and he basically made himself kind of a god. I don't know. It was weird for a while. Then he got guillotined, so it's not a concern anymore. We'll get to that in a minute. We won't spend too much time on Cult of Supreme Being, but point is that was also there. Phrygian caps. It's these little hat things, these little floppy hats, and they've got that bullseye looking thing was the original tricolor. Rather than it being 3 lines, it was like a dot and then a circle and then a larger circle. Yes, this was the old Roman tradition. So, at this point, hundreds of years before, it was basically like a marker so that people wouldn't like tell the guards, hey, this guy, I saw this guy literally like in the market with his master a week ago. Now he's roaming around on his own. We need to make sure like something's not going on. Yeah, the Phrygian cap was just like a symbol for freed slaves. They could. But again, Roman slavery typically was, it's hard to quantify slavery, but like it wasn't like U.S. chattel slavery. Yeah, because it was like people would get captured in battle, and rather than being stuck in a prisoner of war camp, or like being sent to the gulag like in Russia where you go to a camp to work until you die, they will be made into slaves. Now, a lot of that was still like agricultural labor, just like basic grunt work, but not we're going to work them until they die. Just we don't feel like doing this because we're prissy Romans. A lot of Roman slaves were teachers, were tutors. They would be, this was when Greece was captured, and they grabbed all these Greek intellectuals and brought them to Rome as slaves, air quotes, and they were just like made to like, hey, write plays for us or teach our children so they'll be less dumb. It wasn't, they were forbidden from reading and kept in shacks. And I mean, granted, a lot of them were like made into gladiators where they did have to fight to the death. But in Rome, slavery was multifaceted. So all that said, yes, there would be incidents of like, hey, this guy like is faking the Phrygian cap to make it like he's a freed slave. But like if his owner comes to the guards and be like, hey, my slave escaped, this is what he looks like, and they see that guy with a cap, they're not going to be like, oh, well, clearly between this guy telling us and seeing this man, something changed. They grab him. So, yeah, it probably wasn't super widespread, but I could see it happening here and there. You're not wrong. Let's see. Oh, that's all I've got for that. So, then we have the Thermidorian reaction. Now, that sounds like some kind of physics equation. Thermidor was a month in their new weird calendar. It's basically, well, first we talk about prairial, which I don't know what that would translate to in French, but this is like during June and July. This is kind of, it falls when June and July happen. Thermidor is the month after that, and you can tell by the name, that's a hot month. That's July, August. That's like the hottest part of the year. So they called it literally the hot month, which makes sense. Um, so anyway, Robespierre was in charge of the convention. He purged it multiple times so that the only ones who were on the convention were as revolutionary as possible, which meant that if you were on the convention and were essentially in charge of the government, but you weren't seen as being revolutionary enough, you were either asked to leave or sent to the guillotine. So nobody was safe. June 10th, 1794, he urged that tribunal trials be made shorter and execution will be the only penalty. So, A, the trials were shorter, so you didn't have enough time to defend yourself. And B, if you went to a tribunal trial, you had two outcomes: innocent or guillotine. Needless to say, this meant that many more people went to the guillotine, with 1,515 being killed in Prairial alone, which was the month of kind of the end of June, early July. In Paris alone. Obviously, there were guillotines going throughout all of France. So they were really good at killing their people. Which, again, it's like, how the hell did they manage to become like the dominant force in Europe once Napoleon came along if they were killing their own people? So this increase in violence left the convention worrying that Robespierre had become the tyrant that the revolution had been created to get rid of. Because Robespierre had lost his damn mind. And as, again, the book doesn't really go into this, but I remember with the whole cult of the Supreme Being, he placed himself at the top of that too, and was kind of seeing himself as a god. It was a mess. So, on the 9th of Thermidor, which is in late July, they sent Robespierre to the guillotine, and over the next 24 hours, other defenders of the terror were put to death. So, after they got rid of Robespierre, they went around and grabbed all his buddies who had helped him do this and got rid of them. So this caused a significant drop in violence in the revolution because people weren't being killed for maybe being a threat to the revolution down the road. Because remember, that was a reason people get sent to the tribunal trials. So over the course of the next month, only 6 Parisians were executed, which, again, like today when it comes to capital punishment, 6 people in a month is insane. But going down from 1,500 to 6 is significant. Committee of Public Safety gave up many of its powers, and the law of 22 Prairial, which again is this whole we should make the trials shorter, and also if you lose the trial you die, they got rid of that because obviously that was a bad move. Here we have Robespierre. I've seen this image more often without the face. This is from Assassin's Creed Unity, which is plagued with bugs to this day. I played it a few years back, long after it had come out and supposedly had been fixed, but it's still a mess. That has nothing to do, of course, with the French Revolution, but just that when I see this image, I think of it without the face and just the eyes and the teeth, because Ubisoft, man. So here we have people gathering and cheering for the death of Robespierre. You've, of course, got the guards standing around it because people would try to get souvenirs. Clothes, body parts, whatever they could get their hands on. So that's why the guards are there. But anyway, people are having a great time. The dogs are having a great time. I love this one where the dog is like, he don't know what's happening, but the people are happy, so he's having a great time. I mean, you got people like up on the balconies watching. It was very much a big deal. I don't know who this guy is. like he just fell out from the heat or whatever, because Robespierre's body is up there, and he still got his head on, so he wasn't like a previous, I don't know. I don't know what that's about. But anyway, yeah, this was a big deal. They were probably almost excited about this as they were when the king was put to death. Because Robespierre was a danger to everyone. All right, on to the Directory. So the convention realized that what they had wasn't going to work in the long term. Again, this is actually something that we'll see in like communist Russia later, where the idea of having a communist government is to be in constant revolution. You can't have a stable government with that. So they created a two-chambered legislature, a lower council of 500 and upper council of elders. Only taxpayers could vote in this system. So before, where we had universal manhood suffrage, where you could vote from whatever, in this one, you could only vote if you paid taxes. Now, I know that sounds like, well, yeah, you got to pay taxes. Back then, you only paid taxes if you owned land. There weren't sales taxes and income tax and tax to look down the street. You only pay taxes on land because that's where the money came from. Which meant that the only people who voted were those who had land, therefore the wealthy. Also, the upper house could only consist of men over 40 who were married or widowed, because the terror was seen as a product of young single men that were, I guess, not fully mature. They hadn't lived long enough to kind of calm down and take things more moderately. Let's see. They did elect the Directory, which was their executive branch. So rather than having a president or a prime minister, they had the Directory, which was a 5-man group. The lower house nominated and the upper house approved. So again, this is very similar to like modern American, well, I guess the Directory comparing to the president, because that guy's just elected. But with this, where the lower house proposes things and then the upper house can approve it, so they have to work together to function. One director, one of this member of a 5-man group that was running the country, was Emmanuel Joseph Sieyès, who, if you recall, was the one who was the Third Estate, but also he was a member of the clergy. Somehow he survived all of this. Now, granted, for the people who knew who he was, it's like, oh yeah, this is the guy that was the Third Estate, the thing that like got this whole thing rolling. Obviously, he would be above reproach. He wouldn't be a guy that you would send to the guillotine for being clergy. But like, if you had some random mob and they see this guy and it's like, oh, this guy's clergy, let's murder him in the streets, because that's what the sort of thing that was happening. Somehow he avoided all that. So good on you, Sieyès, you survived. After 1793, the wars actually started going in favor of the Republic. There was a young Corsican artillery officer who managed to seize Toulon from the English and Spanish, because that was actually a hell of a thing. I've got a map of Toulon and how that all went, so I'll talk about that in a minute. 1795, Prussia and Spain had made peace with France. The English were defeated at Cubilon Bay, and this same Corsican officer led the French armies through northern Italy against Austria between 1796 and 97, which resulted in the Treaty of Campo Formio that ended the War of the First Coalition in 1797. So, all that to say, Directory's made, France is a bit more stable, and they're doing really well militarily, so they're not under threat of constant invasion. Now you may notice that at no point in here has England made peace with France. England stayed at war with France the entire time. There was no point at which England and France were at peace during this time. So here is Toulon. You've got the Arsenal, which is similar to the Bastille. It's a fortified location that houses, well, the arsenal. It's got all the military equipment. The city is down below it, and yeah, so the city, the arsenal in the middle, and you've got these various forts around the city, keeping it safe. And also, it's in a port. So you've got in this port a bunch of British naval vessels brimming with cannons, more than happy to shoot at anybody they see on the land. However, the French, led again by this specific Corsican artillery officer, put the artillery up on the hills. And if you're familiar with how naval ships worked back then, their cannons couldn't point up. They were made for shooting at ships beside you or potentially land a bit further out. You could not shoot at a hill. So surrounding the port, these cannons fired down the hill very easily into the ships, and the British left, because the British tend to the British do not like having their ships shot at. Something that we did in Boston in 1776. Yeah, it was 76. I was trying to remember if it was 75 because the war didn't start in 76. Anyway, so needless to say, this single officer who started with Toulon and made his way all the way through northern Italy was Napoleon. He was born Napoleon de Bonaparte in Corsica in 1769. Now, Corsica is not a region in France. Corsica is an island out of the Mediterranean that, until like the year before Napoleon was born, was independent. However, in 1768, France took over Corsica. His father was very resentful of this because, I mean, your country gets taken over by another country, you're obviously not going to be too pleased with that. And Napoleon was raised, he was raised in a household that hated the French. He didn't even speak French until his late childhood because, again, his family is going to be very proud of their Corsican heritage, and only began teaching their children French when it became clear that this occupation was not going to be short-lived. And Napoleon maintained a Corsican accent through his entire life. So this guy, who is seen as like the big guy in France, wasn't French. And his family hated the French. But this was a way to improve his lot in life. Because technically, Napoleon's family were nobility. They were minor nobility, but they were technically still nobility. So with the privileges that they had, Napoleon's father sent him to a military training school in France. Because, again, this was prior to the Revolution, so you still have all the various systems of the estates, and therefore Napoleon, being nobility, could just go to a military training school, no questions asked. He graduated at age 16 because he was really good at what he did, and took an additional year in an officer's training school to, well, be an officer. Because, again, nobility was just handed officer roles back then, which would often result in hilariously bad incidents on the battlefield. Napoleon decided to not do that and took another year of officer school so that he would actually be a decent officer. After this, he was given command of a portion of the French French artillery regiment. And after the revolution happened, he just stayed in the military and joined up with the revolution. He wasn't going to fight for France against the revolution. He didn't care. He didn't care who was signing his paycheck. And as we mentioned, while fighting for Republican France, he was extremely successful. That's the word I'm looking for. Extremely successful at the Siege of Toulon. And because of his success in this battle, he was given command of all the French artillery in northern Italy, which wasn't a small amount. That was a significant career boost for him. And he used that to beat the bejesus out of the Austrians until the signing of the Treaty of Campo Formio, which, again, basically, I mean, this was the end of the War of the First Coalition, which, again, technically England's still at war with France, but everybody else has signed a peace with France, due in no small part to this one guy, because of how good he was at leading his troops and maintaining battlefield awareness and putting artillery where it needed to be when it needed to be. So he was good at what he did. I'm going to give Napoleon a little bit of crap, but I can't give him crap for this because he was good at being a military commander. So, again, the British maintained war with France this entire time. So, the French knew they could not invade England directly. They couldn't just sail across the French Channel and land on the shores of England like they had done in 1066. Because England had a pretty good navy, and also they had all sorts of fortifications along the south of England ready for France to give that a shot. So he decided instead to head down to Egypt, which would then give France a foothold near India, which would freak out the British. This becomes a running theme in British history, is if a country wants to mess with England, but obviously is not going to try to cross the channel and fight England directly, because you just don't do that. I mean, Germany never even landed, Nazi Germany never even landed troops in England. They just hit them from the air. They would go mess with India. And oftentimes not even like invading India, just getting near India, and then England absolutely shits its pants. So the Turks that were currently controlling that region, which were known as the Mamluks at this time, were pretty easy to deal with. The Egyptian populace also did not want Napoleon there. The book mentions, I'm just going to say atrocities. Let's see. French forces made slow progress, suffering from an outbreak of plague at Jaffa, mauled by fierce Syrian and Ottoman resistance. At Jaffa, unwilling to leave behind sufficient troops to serve as prison guards, Napoleon had 2,500 captives executed by forcing them into the sea, where those who did not drown were shot by firing squads. Which you didn't do. That's not like, oh, well, that was just a thing they did in the 1700s because everybody was a psychotic. No, that was, says here, a violation of conventional European codes of military conduct. So this was just, they just executed people. Meanwhile, the British Admiral Horatio Nelson had followed Napoleon's ships to Egypt and destroyed them while they were docked, which hardly seems sporting, but what are you going to do? So Napoleon's forces were left without naval support, which meant that A, he couldn't get more supplies and troops, and B, if they were close enough to the shore, which, considering the cannons of this day, meant a few miles from shore, Nelson's ships could hit them with cannons. So that was a nightmare. Napoleon made his way through Egypt and into Syria. However, the French armies in Europe were collapsing, so he had to make his way back to Europe to save the day, while leaving his troops behind to be rounded up, slaughtered, and or captured by the British, Ottomans, and Turks that were still there fighting. But he claimed victory in Egypt because, you know, he's not going to let a little thing like reality stain his legacy. Now, that said, the military aims of the Egyptian campaign failed. He did have archaeologists along because, again, the people at this time were very weird about Egypt. As we mentioned, a lot of mummies were eaten by the Victorians for reasons. But also, Napoleon just straight up had archaeologists along with his army because they were expecting to find, potential archaeological treasures, and they did. They found the Rosetta Stone. The reason we know anything about hieroglyphics is because of this. So, this is something we talked about back in 103. This was made by Alexander the Great during Alexander's control over the region. And this is the same thing written in 3 languages. You've got the Egyptian hieroglyphs at the top. You've got this Egyptian cursive, as they called it, in the middle. And then at the bottom was Greek. And while I don't think we knew what the Egyptian cursive was, everyone who had an education in Europe, and, well, let's just say at this point also America, could read Greek. Because that was like this foundational part of Western civilization, and everyone was a total nerd when it came to Greek history. So when they found this, and they see at the bottom ancient Greek, which again, anyone with a decent education could just read, this was a huge deal. Now that said, because Napoleon just left his men to be captured by the British immediately captured this and brought it to the British Museum, where they have all their other stolen loot. So that's where this currently is. And when I read that, my first thought was, man, they should give it back to France, since France was the one that found it. And then immediately after that, it's like, no, they should give it back to Egypt, because that's where it came from. But, museums. All right. This is the only other weird month thing. 18th Brumaire, which I guess was, I don't know, September, October by this point. No, this is 1799. This is a completely different year, so I don't know what month this is supposed to be. Oh wait, no, yes I do. November. I was right by guessing to start with. Anyway, 1799, the Directory was back at war with Austria. In Italy, the sister republics were collapsing because the people there didn't want to be sister republics, so they were just like letting the enemy troops take over. Let's see. So Sieyès, remember again, author of the Third Estate, got with Napoleon because Napoleon was clearly the guy who could get stuff done. So he helped or spoke with Napoleon and asked Napoleon to help him secure power. So Napoleon, again leading the armies, brought the troops in to the Directory. So this was the 18th Brumaire, year 8, because again, year 0 was when the revolution happened, which with our modern calendar, / the one that everyone else was using back then too, November 9th, 1799, Napoleon's troops forced the councils to disband, and Sieyès intended to basically recreate the council and lead it himself. However, Napoleon was not just some guy that was good at military tactics and nothing else. He was also pretty damn good at politics, and he saw what was happening. So, being as popular as he was with the French, because again, he's their war hero. He's been out kicking ass and taking names all over Europe. He was made first consul, and then only consul. So not just like the guy in charge of the council, but the only guy running the council. 1802, he nominated himself as consul for life, and the voters in France were totally behind that. This is the guy that's leading us to victory. He's keeping France together. He's not just keeping France together, but he's helping us expand. Yeah, this is the guy we want in charge. And then by 1804, he just got rid of the consulate completely and crowned himself Emperor of the French. And then I have, that's volume at. Yeah, took me forever to figure out how to do that, so you got to suffer through this. Here is horrendous Napoleon in this. Okay, that's enough. Okay. Napoleon in this whole, like, Roman emperor garb. It's got the circlet there. It's got that creepy little hand on a stick thing. I don't know what that's about, but that was a thing with, like, Roman. This is all Roman symbolism is what we're seeing here. So yeah, Napoleon goes from, I shouldn't say a dude, because he was still like the general of the armies, but immediately jumped into politics, completely sidelined Sieyès, and within a couple of years had made himself the emperor. And again, the French were totally behind this. Technically, he wasn't king. He was the emperor. So let's discuss that real quick before I let you folks go. So the main goal for Napoleon was to stabilize France. This reminds me of my Western Civ book back when I was in your seats. Let's see, does it have the full title here? It's like here we go. The name of this book is technically Mini Europe's Choice and Chance in Western Civilization. Cool, great. When I was taking this class, our book was called, Western Civilization, yada yada. But the subtitle was The Search for Stability. And that is a theme throughout, I wouldn't even say European history, but all of history is you've got people that yearn for power, they try to take power, it causes instability, and then the reaction to that is trying to return to some level of stability. And sometimes these guys taking power is the push for stability. Set up a national bank to stabilize the franc, which again was the French national currency. Apparently 20 francs was one Napoleon, because Napoleon's a real simple guy. He wouldn't make anything after himself. set up an efficient means of tax collection, sold the Louisiana Territory to the United States for $15 million, which was a deal for us. It was like 3 cents an acre. Because the French, well, we'll talk about that in a minute. This was after, I believe this was after the French got wiped out at Trafalgar. So they barely had a navy to begin with. And if they had held on to this land in western North America, the British and Spanish and just everyone who was fighting them would just use that as a target. So sell it to the U.S., make a little bit of money, and we don't have to deal with it anymore. In stabilizing politics, he mostly just got rid of his opposition, censoring, purging, exile, or with the bandits, just using the army to wipe them out. Which, I mean, I wouldn't say is the best thing to do, but it was certainly the most efficient. Socially, his strategies weren't as good. Now, granted, when it came to his soldiers, it was about meritocracy. If you were good at your job, you could rise through the ranks. Which, again, was not a thing before Napoleon. If you were going to be an officer, you had to be born a noble. If you were a regular commoner that became a soldier and were really good at your job, good for you, you'll never be an officer. With this, regular ass, in the dirt soldiers who were good at their job could rise the ranks and become, I don't know what the French term would be, but I guess, like colonels and even generals and stuff. They didn't have to be born into it because that doesn't make you good at your job. However, meritocracy did not extend to his political aims. He often would give high offices across Europe to his family. And I want to say at least twice this bit him in the ass with the same brother. He had a, what's the term, Dave? Fail son brother. He had a brother that was not good at basically anything. But because he was family, Napoleon put him in charge of, I think it might have been Belgium first. That didn't work. And then sent him to Spain, and that resulted in, Spain rising up against France because his brother was so shit at his job. We'll get into that more specifically later. But, yeah, making your family leaders of places just because no, that don't work. Anyway, there's the Louisiana Purchase. I mean, we all know what the Louisiana Purchase is. It's like a third of the country. Besides the part that we took from Spain during the Mexican-American War. I guess it was Mexico at this point, because it doesn't matter. Hold on, let's go one more. We're almost done. This is important. The Concordat, signed by Pope Pius VII. This made Catholicism the state religion again, extended toleration to Protestants and Jews. The main reason for this was because any regions that they took over immediately resisted because they're being taken over by an anti-Christian regime in the middle of Europe in the 1800s. No, we just had a war over Catholics and Protestants, and now you're going to say, we're just going to get rid of it all? That didn't work. However, in 1804, and this is peak Napoleon, much like with Charlemagne 800 years before, Charlemagne was year 800, so 1,000 years before, you will go to the Pope to be like a symbol of divine right of leadership. However, when the Pope went to crown him, Napoleon took the crown from the Pope and crowned himself. Which, rude, but it also implied that he was not beholden to the Pope, he took power for himself. Which was how it was. The Pope was a symbol. The Pope was a rubber stamp, and he didn't need it. Clutched his pearls and dealt with it. Because you couldn't do nothing to Napoleon. I mean, France was running the show. One other thing here, the Napoleonic Code. This was a universal civil law code that applied to everyone, established equality for all men before the law, regardless of station, outlawed arbitrary, revolutionary, and synchronal justice. Whatever, I'm not entirely sure. I've heard that word, but I've not really looked into it. Basically, you don't get dragged into the street and murdered because people think you did a thing. This is, man, I'm gracious. This is putting basic law back into service. However, it got rid of many of the rights that women had gotten during the Revolution. So, while it expanded rights overall, at least for men, it went back to women basically having no rights. Because that was too revolutionary for France, apparently. So here we have Napoleon, after crowning himself and also crowning his wife, Josephine, as his empress. And as you can see, the Pope is not. Look at the look on that guy's face. He's pissed off, but you can't do nothing. Do I have anything else? No. Next was the Grand Armée, and we'll talk about that next time, which is just the Great Army. Yeah, so we're into Napoleon now. We should finish the chapter next time. Yeah, based on the amount of slides we have. It's just like they crammed Napoleon in at the end, which I get that he was part of the revolution technically, but yeah, that's the whole thing. Also, as a reminder, next Wednesday is the first paper. The default topic is actually this: Napoleon's rise to power. Did that in the French Revolution? Yes or no? And you can give me whatever sources you find to answer that question. Obviously, if you don't want to do that, you can do whatever else. Sure. You want to talk about his coronation with the Pope? Yeah, I'm sure there's plenty of writing on that. Other than that, that's it for today. I will see you guys on Wednesday. Right. Yeah, because next week is another regular week, and the week after that is Francis Marion spring break, and I'm taking that off. So I'm tired. I'm ready for a little bit of a break. I worked a double on Saturday. I'm still tired. So y'all later. Have a good one.